I'm just going to begin by mentioning that the year 1851 was a really banner year in the life of the composer and the career of the composer Giuseppe Verdi. By that time, he was nearing 40 years old, and he'd had a pretty solid and respectable career for over a decade as a professional and successful opera composer. Most of the major houses in the Italian peninsula produced his works. Keeping in mind that if we talk about the Florentine or La Scala Milan or the Opera House in Venice, we're talking about basically different kingdoms in Italy. It wasn't a united country yet. It's worth remembering that if a person from one kingdom went to another, they would not be able to understand each other necessarily. So the language of the opera is sort of a universal one that was adopted. In any case, Verdi's operas had been very successfully produced, and he had also made inroads into the communities of London and Paris. Now, he was, however, in addition to being a shrewd businessman, I want to remind you that he was really good at negotiating contracts. He made sure he was properly remunerated for every project. But his contract with Ricordi, his publishers, kept him not on a tight leash maybe, but he had to produce operas every year. And he did not always have the luxury of choosing which projects he most wanted to do, and also which collaborators. Now, he ended up being quite fortunate on a number of occasions. His first major hit, Nabucco, basically put him on the international map, and that's still performed today. His first Shakespearean project, Macbeth, also was in these years when he was producing an opera every year. He began to chafe a little bit, and he began to feel that he needed the opportunity to kind of expand the Italian language. Let's remember that he inherited what is called the bel canto tradition and techniques which had flourished with composers like Rossini, Donizetti, and those were all about showing off the star singers. And the Italian genius for music theater has always been about the voice, about the carrier of the text. So Verdi will never completely abandon that, but he wanted to experiment, he wanted to try new things, and above all, he was a brilliant dramaturg. He understood exactly what kind of story would make a really unforgettable evening in the lyric theater. So let's look now at Verdi as a 37-year-old, 38-year-old, and he had been introduced to a play, a French contemporary play by Victor Hugo, so you know immediately that it's going to be not a really happy play, called Le Roi s'amuse, just the king amuses himself. And this play it was not only contemporary and French, it was contentious. It was a scathing indictment of the upper classes. Remember, this was produced just after the 1830 revolution in Paris. You all saw Les Mis, right? So you know all about that revolution. And it was also produced as an opera just after the 1848 revolution. So things were really in flux. Things were turbulent politically, both when the play was produced and when the opera was. So the play was removed from the theater after one performance, I believe. It was condemned because it showed a king, a ruling head of a European country, behaving like a morally bankrupt reprobate. And they couldn't allow that. And it contained scenes of depravity and horrifying abuse. And so it was taken out, and Verdi, however, got his hands on it and realized it would make a fantastic opera. I'll take this moment now to introduce you to Dave and Mika, trumpet and viola respectively. And he felt this not so much because of the king, but because of the king's principle, what we would call a court jester. So a little bit more about that in a second. He thought this was a fantastic character to bring to the operatic stage. Now, an opera like this, we have to remember, has to pass the Italian censors, has to pass the Venetian censors. Venice was a pretty liberal city, but censors are always pretty thick and always pretty conservative. So Verdi had to try to get this by them, which he managed to do with the help of his librettist, Francesco Maria Piave. And one of the ploys that they indulged in was to basically say, we're going to present an orgy with full nudity and things like that. And the Venetian censors said, no, you can't do that. They never wanted to do that in the first place, but they inserted all these other little seditious scenes that were too subtle to really catch the censor's eye. In any case, this got to be produced. Just to fast forward a couple of years, because I said this was a really important period in Verdi's life, he will produce another French play, turn it into an opera 2 years later. And it too will have to go past the censors because it asks the audience to treat with great reverence and sympathy a woman who will be referred to really as a prostitute. And the Italians had a lot of trouble getting past that one. But that of course is La Traviata. How many operas are as popular as Rigoletto and La Traviata? One of them comes in between those two and it's called Il Trovatore. So that's a triple whammy that any opera composer would give their eye teeth to produce. And it will end the years of servitude. It will make Verdi sufficiently independent financially and sufficiently important artistically that he can now choose projects that he wants to do and lavish time over them. He produces fewer operas for the rest of his life than he did up to his 40th year. And keeping in mind his last opera was written when he was 80. And so he takes his time. He takes his time not only to work with the best collaborators to make sure that the opera houses are technologically capable of producing his work, to take the time to cogitate and ruminate over what he wants, but also to operate a farm successfully and to look after his house in the country. He was a DIY guy. I have to be careful because I won't say DUI, which is not what he was. So he liked to renovate his house and look after the farms, and he was a very good, successful farmer. So he had a control over his own life. And that starts really with Rigoletto. A number of other things do as well. So let's have a look at this piece. Everybody knows Rigoletto to a certain degree, right? First of all, can you put your hands up if you've seen a live performance of Rigoletto in an opera house before? So not everybody has. I'll try this one. Hands up if you've ever heard this tune. Okay, yeah, that's the most famous song in Rigoletto. So more about that later too. So the first thing, the first gesture of, the first agreement, the first concession that Verdi and Piave had to make was not to set the work in the contemporary age. They felt they simply could not have any kind of aristocrat behaving like that in our time. Because as people like to say, oh yeah, but things are different now, we don't act this way anymore. After you've seen this, ask yourself that question. So in any case, they agreed to set it in the medieval era, where presumably no one was still alive in 1851 who'd experienced that time. And also they had to turn the king into some lesser aristocrat. So he is the Duke. So immediately I want to point out that this time, the idea of setting this at a particular time, has always been a little bit arbitrary. And so I know one of the questions people ask me is this opera going to be set in some futuristic sort of time, or is it, well, yes, it's not set in the medieval ages. It's set in Victorian England, and I think that resonates quite a lot more strongly, certainly with me, because that's an awful lot closer to the time when Verdi wrote it and the time when Victor Hugo wrote his play. And we, as an audience, tend to have a little bit more of an awareness of what was going on in Victoria's London than we did in some faraway, or it was in Mantua, some town in Italy in the Middle Ages. So I don't think that will be as upsetting to people as when they set Rigoletto in Brooklyn, when Jonathan Miller directed it. Now, the other thing is the central character. It's time to discuss him. Triboulet is the name of the court jester in the play, and he becomes a Rigoletto in the opera, and he's very famously presented as a hunchback. And what Glynis has decided to do with this is to instead present him as somebody who has a little bit of a limp. And I thought this was very effective because it reminds us that so many people in the world are quite prepared to make fun of people with even this kind of a handicap, let alone something more visible. And so he's derided. He's the court jester, so he has the Duke's protection. And shall I get us into the character of the Duke by playing some of the opening music on the piano? Would that be okay? So instead of giving us an overture, like the Barber of Seville did with Rossini, Verdi gives us only a prelude that sets the stage, it sets the musical stage for what will happen later in the opera. I'll play a little bit of it. These are trumpets and trombones. I just want to get to the loud part. Now, nobody is going to listen to that and think, oh, this could be quite a happy opera. This is obviously going to be a story that is challenging, and it's not only has sad elements in it. Can I just give you this spoiler? The soprano dies. What kind of an Italian opera would it be if she didn't? So it is sad, but it's violent. There's something violent aggressively in that music, and that is definitely part of the plot of Rigoletto. The instant the lights go on and the action begins, however, we hear music that is obviously meant to remind us of partying. Mm-hmm. In many ways, La Traviata starts exactly the same. There's music it's a festive occasion, and people are partying at the Duke's place. And this is turned into a gentleman's club, where I think things like this happened quite a lot in the 19th century London. In any case, everyone's having a good time. And the party music accompanies a series of sort of conversational things they're sung. They don't count as arias, they don't really even count as tunes. And so you have to pay attention to the surtitles so you get everything in the plot, because it sets it up brilliantly. So I'll tell you, so you have an edge over everybody who didn't come to this. So you have everybody milling about with this lively music, and the Duke starts talking to one of his henchmen, shall we call it, Borsa. He began saying, oh, there's this cute girl at church that I see. And Borsa says, well, are you going to, hit on her? That's basically the language we have today that the Duke would use. And he says, of course I am. Does she know who you are? Of course not. We find out that he's disguised himself as an impoverished student, so he can win her over all that much more easily. We don't discover this for a while. But she goes home at night, and there's some strange old man that she seems to live with, but I think I'll be able to get my paws on her pretty easily. And so we also learn that since this girl is only someone he sees at church, he's got his eyes on another woman at the party. And here's where we learn about part of the Duke's personality. He's got his eyes on, and he wants to lay his hands on, a countess, in other words, a married woman. And she's at the party, and the Duke is sufficiently charismatic that she thinks it might be kind of fun. It might curry some favor with him. So her husband is there, getting more and more enraged, and the Duke just doesn't pay any attention to this. As far as he's concerned, any woman he wants, he can have, and then he can discard her afterwards immediately as easily as a used piece of Kleenex. And that is his personality. So I'm going to play some of this music when we get something like our first aria. And this is the Duke basically giving us part of his philosophy of life. The accompaniment is generic. It's just chords. The harmony's uninteresting, and the tune sounds like a folk song. Of course, it's got a high note. So basically, this is my world. I can pursue anything I want for pleasure. The tune is very charming. It's suave. Verdi asks for it to be sung with elegance, but there's absolutely no depth or complexity to this character at all. And we'll feel that all the way. He's charming on the surface, but there's nothing there underneath that. And he has a certain degree of charisma, and of course he has a certain degree of position in life because of his aristocratic station and his money. It's not sounding like a story that needs to be told at any other time than our own, to me, but we can keep that in mind as you watch it. So going on now, we're going to meet Rigoletto, but first of all, I want to introduce you to one of the main characters of the piece that has a very small role, and this is a count. And just so that you have it all, that you understand what's going on in the Duke's world, he seduces the daughters and wives of his courtiers. So in addition to having his fun, he is able to basically say to the courtiers, don't even think about it. This is my world. You're there to serve me. And finally, one of the counts stands up to him. This is Count Monterone, and he derides him. He said the count's daughter has been debauched by the Duke, and the count stands up to him and ultimately levels a curse against both the Duke and his court jester. The court jester has been taught that to keep the Duke's favor, he can make fun of all these guys when they're saying, you know, how broken they are by the treatment the Duke has given to their wives or daughters. Rigoletto goes and makes fun of them and taunts them. And he can do that with utter impunity because the Duke will always look after him. Keep in mind, though, that all those other courtiers hate him because he's ridiculed all of them. So we watch the Count get clapped into arms and taken away to prison because he said something that angered the Duke. And that's how the first act ends. So we've set up an awful lot of things there. Now let's just remember that at the very, very beginning of the whole act, the whole opera, the Duke's been talking to one of his courtiers about a girl he's seen at church that he has his eyes on, okay? We're about to meet her. So Rigoletto has been stung by this curse. The Duke couldn't care less. Rigoletto is horrified by it. And he's walking home through the streets and reflecting on it when he meets a guy who's sort of murky in the back alleys. And the guy says to him, I offer a service you may be able to use. Now what this guy is a hired assassin. He hires himself out to kill people. He will point out that he's a man of honor later on in the opera, which I find funny. Anyway, his name is Sparafucile, which actually means gunshot, although his method of dispatching his victims is with a blade. I know. This is one of our supers, Mr. David Radford. It's like the Oscars. And he has been watching Rigoletto's house. And what he's seen is that Rigoletto, he believes, has a rival because he sees another man go in there when Rigoletto's not there. So Rigoletto says, maybe another time, but you know, I want to remember who you are. So that's an odd kind of confrontation between these two characters. Sparafucile, of course, is going to become a main character too. So going on, we find that Rigoletto goes home and there is a daughter. Nobody at the court knows about her, knows that he has a daughter, shall we say. And she has been brought up, it's implied she's been brought up in a convent school by nuns, and she's been home for about 3 months, and she knows nothing of her family. She doesn't even know her father's name. She doesn't know what happened to her mother, and Rigoletto wants to keep her completely sequestered from the world, only going to church and being looked after by a nurse. And like most of the nurses, especially the ones called Giovanna in an Italian opera, you know that they're susceptible to bribery. So what he's done really, I think, is to keep the girl so completely naive and unwise in the ways of the world that she is absolutely vulnerable to any kind of influence. And she is, in fact, she has fallen in love with a young, impoverished student that she met at church. So, of course, she is the victim of the Duke. And the Duke pays the nurse enough so that when Rigoletto's not there, she'll let him into the garden of the house, where he will profess undying love to this girl, and he wants to marry her, etc., etc., etc. So that's Rigoletto's secret, and that's why the curse has had such a profound effect on him. He does have a child, he does have a daughter, and he wants, more than anything else in the world, that for her never to come into contact with the scummy level of society that he entertains. So the next thing is, when he is called away, there is a scene with the Duke. He's disguised himself as a starving student named Gautier Malde. And she rhapsodizes about this name and what it means to her. Now I want to point out a couple of things about this aria which make it so ingeniously and uniquely Verdi, and also they point toward Verdi moving in a new direction. Now one of the great no-nos in bel canto singing is to breathe in the middle of a word. But Actually, what Verdi does in this is he puts lots of rests in the middle of words, as if to imitate the breathless, anxious quality that Gilda is experiencing because of her passion for the Duke. She's never experienced anything like this before. So she says the beautiful name, caro nome, and how it makes her heart beat. And she has these little rests. And the violins represent the fluttering of the heart. And that brilliantly lets us understand that underneath the notes she's singing, there's this really intense passion that is beginning to waken in her. And she does something else. Most of the time in a bel canto opera, the arias are individual numbers that are meant to have a climactic moment, usually with a high note, and then they come to a crashing end, everybody claps, and we have to get back into the drama again. What Verdi attempts to do here, he certainly gives Gilda a high note. It's a D sharp for anyone that's wondering. And then, however, he has the aria sort of come to a close very quietly. And we realize, you'll realize it because you'll see them, that there are men gathered around outside Rigoletto's house. As we have learned in Act 1, one of the courtiers has found out that this objectionable cripple, as they call him, has a mistress. And so they decide, we're going to abduct that mistress and bring him to the Duke, and that will avenge all the insults that Rigoletto has hurled at us before. So as they're gathering, Gilda is finishing her aria. The mistress of Rigoletto. Ideally, I guess, we would at this point simply move on with the drama and have no applause. Everybody applauds after this aria. In fact, if you don't applaud, you have to sing a high D sharp in public and see how well you do with it. And so now they are able to confuse Rigoletto, and he participates in his own daughter's kidnapping unwittingly, not knowing about it. And Gilda is taken back to the Duke's apartments. You'll hear him sing about this girl who has disappeared on him. When he went back to the house, she was gone. And he begins to think, I think, have fallen in love with her. But of course, she's treated to the same treatment that he lavishes on all the girls, all the women in his court, and then more or less disposed of. I think there is no way I can adequately illustrate on the piano the aria that you'll hear in the next act, after the interval. Rigoletto has to go back to court knowing that the courtiers fooled him. They told him they were going to kidnap Countess Marula, and instead they kidnap his own daughter. But he has to act as nonchalant as possible until finally he can't anymore. And he has an aria where he curses the courtiers, cortigiani, as this vile race of horrible people. And then he has to turn around and try to appeal to one of them to help him get his own daughter back. It's a fantastic aria. I think it's one of the very best in all of Verdi's works. And you're going to hear a spectacular performance of it tonight. And Verdi does something unusual in this. I'll get you to listen for this. He actually has two solo instruments accompany the plaintive plea of Rigoletto, a solo cello and a solo English horn. There's other instruments playing as well, but these ones make the scene somewhat more intimate. In any case, you'll hear Rigoletto singing this aria, Cortigiani, and the courtiers turn their backs on him. He's alienated every single one of them. So, to put it mildly, by the time Gilda is returned to her father in the court, the Duke is not seen in the rest of the act, and essentially she has been despoiled by the Duke, but she still loves him. Remember when I said she's innocent in the way of the world? She is also a young girl, and her emotions have been excited and opened up, and she's not really in a position to allow her head to control her heart. And so Rigoletto understands he has to do something about this, and then now we have the fourth act. Do you remember when I said Sparafucile will come back? He does. Now, I'm going to play you some music. This is one of the masterstrokes of this work as well. And suffice it to say, we don't have to get into a great deal of detail. Obviously, Rigoletto's going to hire Sparafucci, right? And he's going to pay him a bit extra to kill an aristocrat. And the method that Sparafucci uses is that he gets his sister, who is named Maddalena, to help him. Now, in any 19th century opera house, if a female character is named Maddalena, it means she's a floozy. So you know a lot about her already just by the choice of name. And what she does is she puts the make on the guy that Sparafucci is about to kill and lures him to the little inn that they occupy on the outskirts of town. And he does his job. And that's essentially what's going to happen this time. So the Duke comes into this miserable little hut, and he sings about his philosophy of women. Women are fickle. They're just like leaves blowing in the wind. They can't be trusted for anything. Nothing that they say is true. Nothing can be believed. So don't squander any of your time on women. Just play with them and have fun. Now, the tune that was given to this is as follows. Again, just chunk, chunk. It's a jolly little tune. The minute you've heard it once, you can sing it for the rest of your life. And there are people all over the world who know this song and have no idea it even comes from an opera. Kind of like this one. I don't have to go any further, do I? Everyone knows that too. So this is the song that apparently Verdi withheld from the leading tenor until the day before dress rehearsal, because he knew there's two more of our orchestra players, principal flute, horn player, and he knew that as soon as anybody heard it, it would be heard all over the streets in Venice, as it was. After the opening night, they went outside and they could hear musicians in the piazza playing this tune. So it's been popular ever since. And it's followed by one of the most ingenious quartets. What opera can do that theater cannot do is have four people singing at the same time, completely different and contrasting emotional responses to the same dramatic situation. So we have the Duke professing undying eternal love to Maddalena, who he addresses as Bella figlia dell'amore, beautiful daughter of love. I want to make you my wife, etc., etc., etc. And so that music goes like this. I know it by heart. I don't know why I'm looking for the music. So he has a wonderful, very beautiful, very charming song in which he professes undying love to a woman he's just met. She's been around the block several hundred times. She knows that all of this is just meaningless, and so she responds by laughing at him. Oh, I got it wrong. And outside, we have Rigoletto and Gilda. He has brought his daughter here so she can witness firsthand herself how completely false this Duke is. And here she listens to him saying exactly the same things he once said to her, to this woman of ill repute. So she has sobbing kind of music. And Maddalena laughs. The other thing you have to remember in an opera is that it's not a science class. Yes, there are two people singing full volume inside the shack, and there's a tiny little wall that separates them from two other people who are also singing very loudly, but they don't hear each other. You just have to accept that. Okay? So Verdi has Rigoletto exclaiming to Gilda, "Be quiet, your tears are useless now. Taci!" It almost sounds like he's shouting at her. And he says, after the quartet is finished, now you go back to where we're staying, put on the men's clothes that I left for you. It reminds us that traveling from one city to another at night left you very vulnerable to any kind of criminal, so she's going to have a better chance of surviving if she's dressed as a man. And we'll meet in Verona. So all of this is going on. so that Rigoletto can finish his negotiations with Sparafucile to end the Duke's life. He wants to have that vengeance, and he's doing it on behalf not only of himself, but of Count Monterone, who it's pretty suggestively implied is going to be executed, not only imprisoned. So Gilda unfortunately comes back. She still loves the Duke. And she listens as Maddalena pleads for his life. She says, she basically, she finds him quite attractive. And so she says, why don't you kill the hunchback instead? That's what's in the original. Now, why don't you kill the old guy? And that's when Sparafucile says, what do you think I am, a common thief? I'm a man of honor. But she does coerce from him an agreement that if any other person comes to the door of the inn before midnight, they'll kill that person. Now, there's a storm raging, and I have to show you this because to us now, we've heard silent movie music, some of us. We've heard melodramatic music, and this is kind of the height of melodrama in this particular piece, because outside we have the men's chorus creating the sound of the wind. There's funny little things in the orchestra with the principal flute excelling in them to suggest a storm. And outside in the wings, the men of the chorus are going, that's kind of cute, and it's still pretty effective. But as Gilda hears this woman begging for the life of the man she loves, she decides to give herself up as the victim instead and save the Duke. I'll leave you to watch the subtlety of what happens afterwards. But of course, this is what makes it a tragedy. The Count Monterone's curse has absolutely come back to haunt him, and it will be his own destruction. The Duke is alive and well and oblivious to all of the damage he's caused, and he couldn't care less about any of it. I want to show you now how this opera ends, if you don't mind. Because one of the things that we consider axiomatic about operas is that they're all in danger of being a little too long. I can say that because this one flows by pretty quickly. But I like it especially because at the end, Gilda is no longer with us. Rigoletto has been effectively destroyed. And the last thing that he says is, the curse of Monterone. That's all he needs to say. That's all he needs to refer to. And so Verdi says, okay, let's get this over with. That's it. 30 seconds of loud music, very, very dramatic, in D flat minor, and the opera is done. Now, as I said, this opera was enormously successful immediately. It traveled around the world, and the works that Verdi composed afterwards. Il Trovatore is an interesting one. It's a little bit more old-fashioned, but it's still got fantastic music. Traviata is modern. It's a new piece for 1853. And after that, he gets to write Aida. He gets to write Un ballo in maschera, Don Carlos, and his crowning achievements, Otello and Falstaff. The continuity part of it, you'll notice, I gave you a bit of a hint of that with Caro Nome, but although there are set pieces in this, he doesn't arrive at the absolute continuous flow of storytelling that we have in Otello and Falstaff, but still, we're moving towards that. We're moving towards a more comprehensive joining together of music and storytelling that we'll have, of course, with Richard Wagner, whom Verdi really admired. But Verdi will never abandon the essentially Italianate storytelling and singing that he inherited from the bel canto. So I hope you enjoy this evening. I think you will. I'm positive you will. And let us know your reactions. If you love the show, let us know your reactions. If you don't love it, thanks for coming. Bye for now.